So, Professor, can we just start by you saying and spelling your first and last name for me and your title with Cornell?
Nicholas Rostow, R-O-S-T-O-W. First name is Nicholas, N-I-C-H-O-L-A-S, and I'm a visiting professor of law at the Cornell Law School.
So, break down what is happening in your eyes at the Ukraine-Russia border. I know that's a very wide open question, but I'm interested in your take.
Well, it seems to me that President Putin has made very clear that he thinks the collapse of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century, something I disagree with, and that he views Ukraine as an integral part of Russia and not as an independent state. And he seems to view the other former republics of the Soviet Union, including Russia, as, which include Russia, I should say, as not real countries. Even though they are independent, they are members of the United Nations, and they are sovereign states.
When we look at the fact that this could be one of the largest conflicts in Europe since World War II, I guess, where does international politics go at this point? Because it seems like that's what we're up against. It's all or nothing.
Well, I'm not sure it's all or nothing. I think that the unity of the Western alliance and the Western democracies may give Putin pause, and there are diplomatic off-ramps, if you will, that exist if he's willing to take them. I don't know, having gone to all the trouble of placing an army around and in Ukraine, he can take such an off-ramp, but it's available to him if he wants. And I think and hope that he's been surprised by Western unity, and I hope that President Xi of China takes note.
Is economic strain enough to slow down Putin, who is ultimately supported by the way that the Russian economy works, and his cronies who are maybe in the gas industry or something like that? So is economic and energy sanctions really enough here?
Well, that's an interesting question. They have not proved to be enough in the past. There are very few examples, historical examples, where economic sanctions have changed a nation's policy. People point to South Africa as an example where sanctions against the apartheid regime were part of the reason, at least, that South Africa gave up apartheid. But it also, they gave it up in the context of the end of the Cold War. And that was a big strategic change. I don't know whether Russia and Putin can be dissuaded by economic sanctions. There are those who believe that he has prepared for sanctions by developing and deepening relations with China, and that he's amassed a stockpile of gold and international currencies that will allow him to weather sanctions. Certainly, the sanctions that were imposed in 2014 when he invaded Ukraine the first time did not prove to deter him in any way or change his policy. So I'm a skeptic about the effectiveness of sanctions, although I think they're important to implement.
Is this a repeat of the Cold War in your eyes, or do you think this is going to turn into a hot war?
This is in some ways more dangerous. During the Cold War, we and the Soviets learned, if you will, what one author called conventions of crisis management. And we learned to manage our differences to keep them within limits. There were hot wars. I mean, Korea, Vietnam, these were understandable only in the context of the Cold War, and they were plenty hot. But this is different because this is entirely unprovoked. There is, and it goes to the heart of the international political and legal system. Ukraine is an independent country. It is a member of the United Nations. And what Putin has done is to challenge the most fundamental rules of international law and order. And in my view, we have to defend them, and we have to fight to defend them. Otherwise, they're not going to be worth anything, and everybody will be in it for himself, and nuclear proliferation will just accelerate.
You're a law professor, so I have to ask you, this is obviously a violation of international law and the recognition of, obviously Ukraine, and there are agreements between Russia and Ukraine that Ukraine is its own thing and Russia is its own thing. But, who's in charge of policing this? Because unfortunately, there's no international police agency. There's just international rules that everyone is supposed to follow.
Well, that's true. There is no world government, and the UN Security Council ideally is supposed to have primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security. But when it can't operate because one of the veto wielding members is engaged in aggression, that doesn't stop other people from being able to act. But it falls on other states to take action alone or together with others to enforce the law. And that is, every state has a right of individual and collective self-defense against an armed attack. That is precisely what Russia has engaged in. And so Ukraine has a right of self-defense, and its friends have a right to join it in self-defense. And what form that defense takes, ultimately, it can involve the use of force, but it doesn't necessarily have to.
Oh, go ahead.
There are ways in which something less than the overt use of force can be brought to bear to exert counter pressure on Russia. So economic sanctions are one form. Other forms of activity are possible. But we need to be prepared for Russian assaults on us, principally, I would think, in the cyber domain.
Professor, is there anything that I missed that you would like to add in about any aspect of anything that we've talked about?
Well, I think that there are a number of things. I mean, this is not just a legal issue. This is a geostrategic issue of fundamental importance. Putin, I think, wants to see if he can destroy the Atlantic Alliance. And a number of, former Soviet republics, which we never recognized their incorporation into the Soviet Union, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, the Baltic states, are part of NATO, but they can be outflanked by Russian takeover of Ukraine. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if Putin put pressure on the Baltic states. Now, they're in a totally different relationship to the United States than Ukraine, because we have a treaty obligation to defend them. And President Biden, quite rightly, has made clear that that is a treaty obligation we will fulfill. But I think it's part of Putin's ambition to split NATO if he can. And I suspect that he's been surprised by how effectively President Biden has responded to his assault. The working of the alliance, the maintaining of connections, the keeping all the member states, involved, informed, on deck. We haven't seen diplomacy of that kind since George H.W. Bush worked the phones in the run up to the war with Iraq in 1991. It's been most impressive.
Is there anything else, Professor, that you wanted to expand on, or something that I missed that you feel is important for this piece?
I think that there are larger issues. I mean, it's not just Russia, it's China, it's Iran, it's North Korea. There are a lot of countries run by autocrats which are interested in weakening the United States, weakening its friends and allies, and attacking them one way or the other, directly or indirectly. And how we respond to Ukraine will be a signal to them all. And we don't want to show weakness.
Great. Anything else? I mean, I've got it all. So thank you so
Great.
much. This was great.